The last photo Jenna Dinger ever sent was almost too perfect. It showed her sitting cross-legged in front of a lime green dome tent. 7 months pregnant, beaming at the camera in a soft blue maternity sweater. Behind her, Marcus knelt, one hand protectively on her shoulder, his other cradling a camping mug. His grin was wide and sunlit, his eyes barely visible behind his sunglasses. In the background, the sparse alien landscape of Joshua Tree National Park stretched into a blur of tan and gold rock formations under an impossible blue sky. The message that followed the photo was brief, all set up for the night. "The dessert is beautiful. Love you," sent at 6:43 p.m. June 3rd, 2011. Khloe Dinger, Jenna's younger sister, received the message in Westwood. Just as she was settling into bed with a bowl of microwave popcorn and a rerun of Bones, she smiled. At the text, tapped out a quick reply, "Stay hydrated. Love you back." Didn't think much of it. Her sister had been counting down to this baby moon trip for months. Last weekend adventure before life became diapers and midnight feedings. By the time Khloe woke up the next morning, though the silence had begun, and it would stretch. For over a decade, it started with the noon check-in. They had a plan. It's not a formal one, just a sisterly agreement born out of Khloe's anxious nature. Jenna was to call or text sometime the next morning, noon at the latest, just to confirm everything was fine. Marcus had even installed Starlink on their new camper van so they could stay connected in the remote park, where cell signals rarely wandered. It was a comfort for Khloe, knowing her heavily pregnant sister wasn't completely off the grid. But noon came and went. Khloe checked her phone repeatedly, refreshing her messages, checking her signal bars, even switching to Wi-Fi and back again. At 12:47 p.m., she sent a "Hey, everything okay?" text, no reply. By 2:30, she was pacing. By 4:10. Her rationalizations had worn thin. By 5:42. Her hands were trembling as she Googled the number for Joshua Tree National Park's visitor dispatch. By 7:15. 2 park rangers were winding down a dirt service road, guided only by the coordinates Jenna had once mentioned, and the photo Khloe had forwarded, a makeshift map made of pixels, timestamps, and growing dread. The scene was exactly as in the photo. The white ProMaster van sat at the edge of a small clearing, tires resting on the flattened desert sand. The tent was pitched about 30 feet away, taut in the dry evening wind. Camp chairs faced a cold, unused fire pit, a lightweight folding table held a mostly full bottle of sparkling water and 2 unopened snack bars. Everything was in its place. Everything was intact, except Marcus and Jenna were gone. Rangers called out. No reply. They found the tent zipped shut, 2 sleeping bags neatly laid out. No sign of a struggle, no hurried departure. Just a campsite frozen in time. The camper van was locked. From the outside it looked lived in, but not disheveled. No broken windows, no scratches, just quiet. By dawn, the area was cordoned off. Yellow crime scene tape flapped lazily in the breeze as the sheriff's department arrived with evidence kits and clipboards. A locksmith, it's called. The inside of the van told no more of the story than the outside had. Everything was in order. Trail mix clipped shut on the kitchenette counter. Small trash bin with a couple of empty food wrappers. 2 wallets, undisturbed, still holding IDs and cash. A bottle of Jenna's prenatal vitamins sat neatly beside a backup flip phone. Was no blood, no mess, no panic, just absence. News of the disappearance broke 2 days later. It was the kind of mystery that the media loved: beautiful young couple, loving marriage, expectant baby, picturesque setting, and a complete vanishing act. What? Overnight, Marcus and Jenna became the poster faces of vanished in the wild. Friends described them as deeply in love, excited new parents, the kind of couple everyone wanted to be. Jenna was a kindergarten teacher on maternity leave. Marcus ran a small consulting firm out of Temecula. They hiked, they baked, they had a dog named Tinsley. They were planning to name the baby Samuel after Marcus's grandfather. Volunteers canvassed the park for weeks. Helicopters scanned the terrain. Rangers coordinated grid searches with thermal imaging. Every lead dissolved into dust. There were no footprints, no campfire disturbances. No gear missing except what might have been worn on a short hike boots, light jackets, Jenna's water bottle, a hiking stick, and one phone. The primary smartphone, the one that had sent the final photo. That too had gone silent. Then came the debt. It was Khloe who first refused to believe it. The financial investigator discovered Marcus had quietly borrowed tens of thousands from hard money lenders over the previous 2 years. Loans with brutal interest rates and no official paper trail. He was on the verge of defaulting. The narrative shifted. Was this a planned disappearance? A murder-suicide? Carefully orchestrated escape? The family split over the theories. Some believed Marcus had snapped under financial pressure, done something unspeakable. Others insisted he was incapable of harming Jenna, especially not with the baby on the way. A gas station sighting added gasoline to the fire. A man matching Marcus's description was spotted late at night buying a burner phone, a paper map of the Southwest, and paying with crumpled bills. The tip was vague, but it was enough. The sheriff's office officially changed the classification from missing to wanted, but no charges were filed. No body was ever found. No real proof, just shadows. By the end of 2013, the case had cooled. The van sat in the county impound lot, wrapped in plastic, its tires deflating with time. Investigators moved on. The headlines faded. The Dinger family learned how to live with unanswered questions. Every birthday, every anniversary, every what-if felt like a scar being reopened. Khloe, though, never stopped. She called detectives. She checked online forums. Even created a blog, Where Are the Dingers? Detailing every fact, theory, and inconsistency. She refused to let the world forget her sister. And then, in late summer 2022, a hiker in a remote corner of Joshua Tree stumbled across something half buried beneath a granite outcropping. A curve of off-white, exposed in the sand. Not rock, not trash. Bone, in the silence of 11 years, cracked open. The man who found the bone was not looking for trouble. Derek Vincent was a 39-year-old software engineer from Seattle, burnt out from the blur of agile meetings and product deadlines, looking to unplug for a few days beneath the searing sun of Joshua Tree. He liked hiking off-trail. He liked silence. He liked places where cell service failed and the world felt impossibly old. It was October 14th, 2022, dry. Wind. Derek hadn't followed a trail for over an hour when he veered off toward a cluster of granite boulders shaped like knuckles breaking through the skin of the earth. He needed to relieve himself and didn't want to be seen, though he hadn't passed another person in miles. The ground crunched softly under his boots, loose sand, bone-dry shrubs, the occasional creosote bushing, till something in his peripheral vision halted him. A patch of ground disturbed. Animal activity, he thought. Maybe a coyote had been digging, but something pale was protruding from the sand. He crouched. What he initially thought was a curved root or some plastic debris revealed itself to be dense, pitted, and unmistakably organic. Derek had been on enough true crime Reddit forums to know what he was staring at. It was a rib. He recoiled, stumbling backward, nearly losing his balance. He blinked, hoping he was wrong. A second smaller curved bone was visible just beneath. The first, not a stick, not a rock, not a question, bones. Derek backed up another 15 feet and called 911. His voice was shaking as he described the find. The dispatcher, calm and efficient, kept him talking, trying to pin down his location. From his vague references to rock formations, the sun's position, and a dirt road he'd crossed earlier, Derek hadn't taken a GPS tracker with him. His smartwatch battery had died. He was in the middle of nowhere with a corpse, or what was left of one. Stay put, the dispatcher told him. Don't touch anything. Help is on the way. He didn't move for 45 minutes. He couldn't. The first on scene were 2 rangers, followed by sheriff's deputies. The scene was secured quickly, and Derek was taken back to a visitor's center to give a formal statement. A forensic anthropologist was brought in by nightfall, a veteran of old crime scenes and desert exhumations. The grave was shallow. The bones were remarkably intact. preserved by the arid climate. What the forensic team initially believed was one. A set of remains was, within an hour, revealed to be two, a woman and a fetus. The adult skeleton was seated in a fetal position, arms curled, knees to chest, as if shielding herself. And nestled within the curve of her pelvis, impossibly small, were the fragile remains of a nearly full-term fetus. It was Jenna. It had to be no other missing pregnant woman had been reported in that part of the park in the past 2 decades. Forensic team remained cautious. No names, no conclusions. Not yet, but in the sheriff's department. A cold wind blew through the records room. The Dinger file was back open. Khloe. Dinger was in her car outside her apartment complex when her phone rang. It was Detective Miles Corbin, a voice she hadn't heard in over 8 years. "Are you sitting down?" he asked, and Khloe knew. She didn't cry. Not at first. She just nodded. A slow, sick movement. Her hand clenched so tight around the phone that her knuckles turned white. Jenna found she asked the questions she'd been preparing for years. Where? How? When? Was Marcus with her? But Corbin had few answers. Just this. Human remains had been discovered in a remote part of Joshua Tree. The remains appeared to match Jenna's general description. The body had not been buried deep, perhaps hurriedly, or with the assumption that no one would ever stumble across it. And there was more. Fetal remains were present. Authorities would be conducting DNA analysis immediately. "I need you too." "Come down," Corbin said. "We'd like to get a sample for comparison," Khloe agreed without hesitation. She didn't sleep that night. She lay on her living room couch, staring at the ceiling, her phone balanced on her chest. She didn't tell her parents until the next morning. She didn't have the words. All she could see was the picture of the last photo Jenna had sent. It's frozen in her phone's gallery, bright and happy and horrifying now. At the forensic lab, the results came back faster than expected. It was Jenna. The DNA sample taken from the bones matched Khloe's. The fetal skeleton was consistent in development with a 3rd trimester gestation, approximately 32 weeks. She had not survived long past the date of the final photo, but there was no sign of Marcus, no grave nearby, no scattered bones, no clothing scraps, no watch, ring, or boot tread impressions, nothing. The discovery of Jenna's body appended the case. It destroyed the long-standing theory of a murder-suicide or a runaway husband. The burial was not close. To the original campsite trailer, it was miles into the most inaccessible part of the park. Terrain that would take hours to reach on foot. Whoever placed her there had done so with deliberation. Whoever knew about this location had intimate knowledge of the landscape, which raised a new, far darker question. Had someone else been involved all along? Detective Miles Corbin wasn't young anymore. He'd been 28 when the Dingers vanished, barely 2 years on the job, working traffic and learning how to take statements. He remembered the case not because he'd been involved, but because he hadn't. He'd stood at the crime scene. Back in 2011, one of a dozen deputies, assigned to perimeter duty. It had haunted him ever since. Now he was in charge, and the first thing he did was reread everything, every interview, every financial record, every forgotten detail. He barely slept, eating vending machine chips and guzzling cold coffee in the basement. Archives, where the physical case files still lived in a heavy manila folder labeled Dinger. 2011 JTNP, and on the 3rd night, he found it. A report filed. August 2017. It described the recovery of a waterproof map tube from a hidden compartment inside. The ProMaster van and area missed during the original sweep and only uncovered when the van was scheduled to be released from impound. Inside the tube, several custom-printed geological survey maps, highly detailed, hand-annotated strange markings. Corbin dug deeper. A note in the file described the maps as professional grade, likely produced by a private surveying company, and covered in phrases like pegmatite dikes, possible monazite, and Czech alluvium. None of it had made sense at the time. The theory then was that Marcus had cracked under financial pressure and run. These maps had been a curiosity but irrelevant. Now, They screamed importance. And when Corbin overlaid the coordinates from the burial site with the map's annotations, his blood ran cold. The spot where Jenna and her unborn child had been buried lay within a hand-drawn circle on one of the maps. This wasn't random. This wasn't panic. It was geography. Purpose. Someone had marked this land long before it became a grave. At the same time, the medical examiner was conducting a microscopic analysis of Jenna's bones, using new techniques unavailable in 2011. One sample, taken from the neck vertebrae, was particularly revealing. Under scanning electron microscopy, the bone surface showed embedded particles, fine, metallic, granular. They weren't natural to the desert soil. They weren't road dust. They weren't from decomposition. They were a form of thorite, a rare radioactive mineral found only in limited geological formations, and often sought after by illegal prospectors. It was not the kind of contamination one acquired by accident. It suggested something explosive. Jenna may have died or been killed in the presence of rare earth mineral mining, and someone, perhaps Marcus, had known about it. The question changed overnight. It was no longer, did Marcus kill his wife? It became, what did Marcus find Dan, who didn't want him to? The FBI was notified. The Department of the Interior quietly consulted, and for the first time since 2011, there was a trail to follow, because the geological survey maps, they hadn't been made by Marcus. They matched a style, software, a signature. Only one other person in Marcus's life had ever used, his former business partner, a man named Leland Croft. And 12 years ago, Leland had a motive, a temper, and a secret worth killing for. In the fall of 2022, Leland Croft owned a tidy hardware store in Sisters, Oregon. Croft's Hardware and Feed, the kind of place where people still knew each other's names, where weekend gardeners and cattlemen both came for advice, and where Leland, now 54, stood behind the counter in a red apron, talking pesticides and pliers with quiet authority. If anyone remembered that he used to live in California, they didn't ask. And if Leland remembered the names Marcus and Jenna, Dinger, he gave no sign of it, but Detective Miles Corbin did. And now, so did the task force. Leland's name had only appeared once in the original Dinger file buried deep in a witness transcript from July 2011. Back then, he had claimed to be shocked and saddened by Marcus's disappearance, describing their business split as amicable, if a little tense. The interview had lasted 15 minutes. He had an alibi. There was no further follow-up. Now, 11 years later, Leland Croft was the center of everything. Corbin moved fast. He requested Leland's old credit card records, reviewed the 2011 business filings, and within 72 hours, a picture began to form. Leland Croft wasn't just a hardware store owner or former business consultant. He was obsessed with geology. Over a 5-year span leading up to 2011, Leland had subscribed to a half-dozen prospecting journals, purchased topographical software, paid for geological surveys, and even submitted permit applications under pseudonyms. The maps found in the Dinger van, they weren't Marcus's handwriting. They were Leland's. Corbin brought in a geologist from UC Riverside to analyze the maps and notes. Her verdict was immediate. The data showed a sophisticated amateur understanding of rare earth mineral formation. He was chasing thorite, she said, tracing one of the pencil lines across a ridge, and he knew exactly where to look. Corbin's gut churned. If Leland had created these maps, Marcus had gotten hold of them. If there had been a confrontation in the desert, he didn't want to finish the thought. He just packed a bag and boarded a flight to Oregon the first time Corbin saw Leland Croft. Looked harmless. A little rounder in the face. Hairline retreating. Glasses on a cord. Was helping an elderly woman pick out tomato cages. He smiled when Corbin and his partner entered the store. "Help you folks with something? We'd like to ask you some questions," Corbin said, flashing his badge. Leland's smile twitched, but he nodded. "Let me get someone to cover the register." At the local police station, in a quiet interrogation room that smelled like lemon cleaner, Leland Croft sat across from Corbin, arms folded. He didn't ask for a lawyer. "I remember Marcus," he said. "Smart guy. Idealistic. A little too." Trusting, and Jenna. A sweetheart. Couldn't say a bad word about anyone. You were business partners, Corbin said briefly. He didn't like how I ran the books. I didn't like how he ran his mouth. We parted ways. Your financial split? Clean. Corbin slid a photo across the table. A high-res scan of one of the maps recovered from the Dinger van. Recognize this? Leland leaned forward. His eyes flicked once over the page. He chuckled. Looks like the kind of thing Marcus would have scribbled when he was chasing gold-panning blogs. Oh, he had a real thing for treasure maps. The deflection was smooth. But Corbin saw the flicker, the way Leland's left thumb tapped once against the edge of the table. An unconscious tick. Did you ever prospect in Joshua Tree, Leland? Leland sat back. Never, that's a federal offense. What about thorite? He blinked. A little too slow. Thorite. It's a radioactive rare earth mineral found in pegmatite dikes. Ouch. Usually buried in protected land. We found trace deposits embedded in the victim's cervical vertebrae. Lips parted slightly, then closed. I wouldn't know anything about that. Corbin stared, then slid another photo across the table. It showed a digitally enhanced boot print on the step of the Dinger Van 1, that forensic imaging. Back in 2011, had pulled from original crime scene photographs. Next to it, another image. The tread of a red-backed geological boot. Leland's preferred brand. You wore these in 2011, right? Your credit card shows a purchase. Leland didn't speak. His hands flexed once, then stilled. Corbin leaned forward. We have the boot print inside the van. We have geological maps in your handwriting. We have trace minerals in the victim's bones that match exactly with the prospecting site you surveyed. Then softly, you don't have to be the villain in this story, but you are already part of it. Leland Croft exhaled. Slow, controlled. Then he said, I want a lawyer. Back in California, Corbin had to make a decision. Leland had clammed up. No confession. No slip of the tongue. But Corbin wasn't worried. They had enough to apply pressure. And more than that, they had a trail. Because the maps Leland had drawn, they weren't just survey markers, they were coordinates. And one of them matched. Then 200 meters, the shallow grave where Jenna had been found, another. It led to a long-abandoned mine shaft, which meant there was still one. Piece left to find, Marcus Dinger. The recovery operation took 3 days. The abandoned shaft, located deep within a craggy outcropping near the northern border of the park. It was unstable, too narrow and dangerous for personnel to enter directly. Corbin brought in a remote forensics unit from Caltech, a team that specialized in drone-based subterranean mapping. The drone, equipped with high-resolution lights and cameras, descended into the shaft on a wire. It passed layers of old support. Beams. Fossilized rodent nests. Trash from a bygone mining era. And then, at 147 feet, a tangle of cloth, bone, and leather. The remains were wedged between collapsed timber and broken rock dry. But intact, dental records confirmed what Corbin already knew. Marcus Dinger had been murdered and thrown into a shaft to be forgotten. Back in Oregon, the arrest was quiet. Leland Croft was taken into custody without incident. His home was searched. His computers were seized. Dozens of topographical files were recovered, maps, mineral reports, scans of USGS documents, and some dating back to 2008. His trial, scheduled for spring of the following year, was expected to be national news, but Corbin didn't care about that. What mattered was that the case was no longer a ghost story. The Dinger file had an ending now, and somewhere in the desert, under a canopy of ancient rock, the wind whispered across a spot where truth had finally taken root. The media frenzy began within hours of the press release. Hiker uncovers. Remains an 11-year-old Joshua Tree mystery splashed across every local news ticker by morning. Within a day, national outlets picked it up, rebranding the cold case. With flashier headlines, vanished couple found after a decade. Was it murder? The Dinger disappearance. Secrets buried in the desert. By day 3, Jenna and Marcus were front page again, frozen in that final photo. A young pregnant woman smiling in the desert, her husband beside her, grinning, unaware that it would become their last portrait. For Khloe Dinger, oh, it was like the first days all over again. The phone calls, the reporters, the sudden swell of attention around people she loved deeply and had quietly mourned for years. She hadn't asked for this ending. She had hoped irrationally for something softer instead. It had returned sharp-edged and cruel. "You were right," Detective Corbin had said when he called with the confirmation of Marcus's remains, about everything.
Oh.
But those words brought no comfort, because being right didn't undo what had happened. It didn't bring Jenna or Marcus back. It didn't change the fact that they had died alone in the desert, victims of a man who'd walked free for over a decade. Still, the truth mattered. Even when it hurt, Leland Croft was denied bail. He appeared in court for arraignment, shackled and pale, its expression unreadable as the charges were read aloud. 2 counts of first-degree murder, obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence, unlawful prospecting on federal land. The district attorney called it one of the most cold-blooded, calculated acts of betrayal we've ever seen. Prosecutors built a timeline. May 2011. Marcus and Leland's consulting partnership dissolves amid mounting tension. June 2011. Marcus accesses geological surveys and annotations belonging to Leland, possibly without permission. June 3, 2011. Marcus and Jenna embark on their camping trip, telling family it's a final getaway before the baby. June 4, 2011. The last message is sent from Jenna's phone at 6:43 p.m. June 6, 2011. Leland is seen in surveillance. Footage buying a burner phone, a road atlas, and paying with cash. June 7, 2011. Leland returns to his home, never reported missing, never questioned again until now. The story they believed was simple. It's chilling and devastatingly plausible. Marcus had confronted Leland, possibly threatened to report the illegal. Prospecting to the Bureau of Land Management, Jenna heavily pregnant. Trusting unaware, had accompanied him into the park, likely under the impression it was a harmless baby moon. She may have waited in the van while Marcus hiked to the rendezvous point. Or perhaps she had gone along. No one would ever know exactly what was said in that moment, what was demanded, what was threatened. But the result was clear. Marcus was struck. Likely with one of the heavy survey tools later found buried at Leland's property. Jenna, upon witnessing the killing, became a liability. A witness. Pregnant woman who would never forget what she'd seen. So he killed her too. The burial site matched one of Leland's survey markers. The shaft where Marcus was found had been drilled decades earlier during a short-lived mining boom and forgotten. Leland had known about it. The knowledge had made Marcus disappear so easily. Then Leland played the long game. He returned to his. Life created an alibi. Faked a trail of clues leading investigators away from himself and toward Marcus. It had worked for 11 years, until it didn't. For Corbin, there was only one task left, cataloging close. He spent days reviewing the digital. Copies of the old case files now juxtaposed against the confessions, the maps, the surveillance stills. It was staggering in hindsight, how close they had come to the truth so many times, and how often they had turned away. There had been a moment. Back in 2012, when a junior officer noted the strangeness of Marcus's debts, why they weren't accompanied by any purchases, why the records seemed more like legal maneuvering than desperation. There had been a call. Months later from a geology professor in Nevada who'd found one of Leland's forum posts and flagged it. No follow-up. Even Khloe's own emails, too. The sheriff's department, asking about a name, Leland Croft. Could he have known Marcus was going to Joshua Tree? Had gone unanswered. The story hadn't just been buried in the desert. It had been buried in paperwork. And now it was time to exhume all of it. On a warm evening in late November, Khloe returned to Joshua Tree for the first time in 10 years. The park was quiet, the wind soft. Detective Corbin met her at the ranger station, where a small memorial had been set up, 2 smooth desert stones etched with Marcus and Jenna's names, along with a tiny heart carved beneath the year 2011. We don't always get endings. He told her, "I didn't want this one, Khloe," replied, but she stood in front of the stones anyway, her arms folded across her chest, breathing in the stillness. She placed a photo on the ground, a copy of that final image, the last thing she'd ever received from her sister. Marcus smiling, Jenna glowing, the desert endless behind them. And for the first time in over a decade, Khloe didn't feel like she was screaming into a void. They had been heard. The trial began in March 2023. Leland Croft pleaded not guilty. His defense painted him as a wronged businessman whose maps had been stolen, but nothing to gain from harming the Dingers, who had been dragged into a national scandal by bad science and old grudges. They attacked the forensic data, questioned the bootprint analysis, suggested contamination at the gravesite. They failed because the prosecution had what mattered: motive, access, opportunity, and physical proof. The thorite embedded in Jenna's vertebrae, the geological bootprint inside the van, the matching notes and handwriting on the hidden maps, and, perhaps most damningly, a partial confession. After 11 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts, Leland. Croft was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. He showed no emotion as the sentence was read. But Khloe did, she cried, for the first time since her sister vanished. The tears were not for loss, but for justice in the years that followed. The Dinger case became the subject of multiple documentaries and investigative podcasts. Students of law enforcement studied it as a cautionary tale, how one man had used a mix of specialized knowledge, isolation, and misdirection to evade capture for over a decade. But in the Dinger family, no one spoke about Leland Croft. They spoke about Jenna, about her laugh, which was loud and unfiltered, about her handwriting, which curled upward like a vine, about the way she rubbed her belly in photos, as if already communicating with the child she never got to meet. And they spoke about Marcus, about how he built the crib by hand, about the stack of children's books he had left on the dresser, about how he'd insisted on making Jenna's smoothies every morning during her pregnancy. They weren't a cautionary tale. They were people, loved, missed, remembered, and finally known. The trial had ended. The jury had spoken. The world had moved on. But for Khloe Dinger, closure wasn't a verdict. It was a long, silent walk through the rooms of her memory. In April of 2023, 3 weeks after Leland Croft was sentenced to life in prison, Khloe returned to her sister's old house for the first time since 2011. The home had remained in the family all these years, rented to strangers under short leases, kept just enough to avoid decay, but never touched in ways that mattered. Her parents had always said they would sell it after things were resolved. That phrase had become a ritual, a way to avoid accepting the permanence of loss. Now, the truth finally laid bare, and the killer behind bars, there was no longer any need to pretend. The house stood on a quiet cul-de-sac in Temecula. Stucco, walls, low hedges, an arched doorway Jenna had once painted sky blue. Khloe unlocked the front door and stepped inside. Dust motes swirled in the air, visible in the narrow streams of sunlight filtering through the blinds. Everything was smaller than she remembered. She walked through the rooms like a curator in a forgotten museum. In the nursery, the crib still stood, unfinished, unvarnished, the wood raw and dry. Quilt Jenna had started was folded neatly on. The changing table, single stuffed elephant, sat in the corner, untouched. Khloe ran her fingers along the railing of the crib, then sat down on the floor and wept, not for justice, not for vengeance, but for everything that would never be. Meanwhile, back in California, the sheriff's department officially closed the Dinger case. Detective Corbin authored the final report, comprehensive 148-page summary that detailed every piece of evidence, every timeline, every interview, every misstep, and every breakthrough that had brought them to Leland Croft's conviction. The report was meticulous, unemotional, but Corbin wasn't. He'd taken on the case out of a sense of duty. It had haunted him, gnawed at the corners of his memory, since he was a rookie officer standing next to a silent, abandoned campsite under the stars. Solving it had been the highlight of his career, but now that it was over, he felt adrift. There was no promotion, no parade, just paperwork. Closure wasn't a ribbon cutting. It was a locked drawer, a printed file, and silence. He handed in his retirement papers the next week, in May. Khloe received an unexpected email. It came from a woman named Dr. Helen Amiri, a forensic anthropologist who had worked on Jenna's remains. She'd been part of the team that performed the delicate excavation in Joshua Tree and had overseen the microscopic analysis of the thorite particles embedded in Jenna's vertebrae. Her subject line was simple: closure, if you want it. The body of the message explained that Jenna and the baby's remains had finally been released by the county. The process had taken months: DNA confirmation, cause of death assessments, cross-referencing missing person files, confirming no further forensic value remained. They were ready to come home. Khloe read the email twice, then she closed her laptop, got into her car, and drove straight to the county medical examiner's office. She signed every form, answered every question, and when they handed her the small, polished wooden urn containing the ashes, she held it with both arms, like carrying a child. The memorial service took place beneath a stand of Joshua trees just outside the park boundary. In an area the family had visited with Jenna years before, it was a small gathering. Khloe, her parents, a few close friends. Detective Corbin, now retired, stood quietly at the back, hands clasped in front of him, dressed in plain clothes. No cameras, no journalists, just the people who had waited for the truth and now carried its weight. Khloe read a letter she had written to Jenna in it. She talked about the day they got matching earrings from a boardwalk vendor in Santa Monica. About the time Jenna baked a cake with salt instead of sugar and refused to admit it was a disaster. About the way she danced, arms flailing, absolutely no rhythm and no shame. Then, softly, she added, "I never stopped looking. I never stopped. Hearing your voice, and I hope wherever you are, you know, I brought you home." The urns, one for Jenna, one smaller for the unborn child, were placed side by side in a garden burial plot. Wildflowers were planted. A small granite plaque bore both names: Jenna Lee Dinger, 1984 to 2011, baby Samuel Dinger, forever loved. Never forgotten, and beneath both, a single line: the desert kept their secret, but love never did. In the months that followed, Khloe did. Something no one expected. She stayed. She didn't return to LA where her life had once been. She didn't go back to the city, or the noise, or the job in commercial design she'd long stopped caring about. Instead, she leased a small house near 29 Palms, got a part-time job at a local gallery, adopted a dog. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some movie epiphany. It was survival. She walked the edges of the desert at dusk, watched the way the sunlight fell in long stripes across the sand. She began to draw again, not for clients but for herself. Sketches of rock formations, faces she imagined Jenna's baby might have had. Silent impressions of things that couldn't be said out loud. The desert. Once a graveyard of questions became her sanctuary, not because it forgot, but because it remembered. One afternoon in July, as monsoon clouds loomed low over the horizon, Khloe received a letter in the mail. No return address. Just a plain envelope. Inside was a single page, typed, unfolded. You were right to keep looking. He never meant to hurt them. But he couldn't let go of what he thought he deserved. I wish I had spoken up sooner. I'm sorry. Khloe stared at it for a long time. No fingerprints, no envelope glue. She took it to the sheriff's department the next day. The detectives reviewed it, photographed it, ran it for latent prints and handwriting analysis. Nothing came back. It was likely anonymous, possibly from a former colleague of Leland's, maybe even someone who had once known about the prospecting. Or maybe it was just guilt wearing someone down. Either way, it didn't matter. The truth had already been told. The story was over. But grief, like the desert, doesn't vanish. It simply reshapes itself with time, and sometimes in the quiet. Between windstorms, you can almost hear what was left behind. The summer of 2023 was supposed to be the season of closure. Instead, it became the season of questions. The anonymous letter sent to Khloe, typed, unsigned, and haunting, had opened a door she thought was sealed. Detectives from the Riverside County Sheriff's Department, though outwardly dismissive, quietly reopened parts of their digital case archive. They ran keyword searches on old tipline logs, interviewed a few remaining contacts from Marcus and Leland's business days, and even re-examined employee rosters from Croft's consulting firm circa 2009-2011. Nothing concrete emerged. But what was most unsettling wasn't what the letter said. It was what it suggested. Someone else had known. Someone who hadn't come forward in 2011, or in 2022, or even after the trial. Someone who had remained silent all that time until now. Khloe spent weeks trying to ignore the envelope. She tucked it in a drawer. Tried to focus on her small-town routines, sketching in the afternoons, volunteering at a local wildlife rescue center, walking her dog along old mining roads just past the park boundary. But it stayed with her, not just the message. The tone there was something oddly intimate about it. The language wasn't cold or calculated, read like remorse, familiarity, not the gloating of someone proud of getting away with something, but the muted regret of someone who had watched it happen from a distance. And the signature A? That single initial scraped at her brain. She couldn't help it. Her thoughts spiraled. Accomplice? Ally? Ashley? Adrian? Ava? She scrolled through old Facebook messages, old company bios, even LinkedIn connections she had never paid attention to. She didn't sleep well for weeks, not because she feared danger, but because some part of her feared the truth still wasn't finished. Detective Corbin had officially retired, but that didn't stop him from digging. He had kept a private case log of the Dinger investigation, not the official, courtroom-ready documentation, but his own journal. Notes, side thoughts, connections that weren't strong enough for warrants but too compelling to ignore. And when Khloe called him to ask if Leland Croft had ever had any employees whose names began with a, Corbin didn't hesitate. There was one, he said. And it's funny you mention it. I've been thinking about her lately, too. Her name was Alessa Warren. She'd worked with Leland as a part-time data entry assistant between 2009 and early 2011. She was 23 then, fresh out of community college, majoring in geography with a minor in environmental tech. Her name appeared once in the records, a scanned copy of a non-disclosure agreement Croft had all his employees sign. But that was it. No interview. No follow-up. Just a ghost in the margins, Corbin remembered, seeing her name and making a note to find her. But then the fugitive theory had taken over. The tip from the gas station. The mounting evidence against Marcus. And in the rush to find a man believed to be on the run, Alessa Warren had been forgotten. But now she was starting to feel like the hinge. Khloe and Corbin met at a diner just outside Cathedral City. He was thinner now, grayer. Retirement hadn't made him slower, just more candid. I found her, he said, sliding a file across the table. She lives in Morro Bay, goes by Allie now. Works as a GIS consultant for a conservation group, still under 35, still off the grid socially, practically a ghost. Khloe flipped through the pages. A recent DMV photo, LinkedIn profile, a brief background report. Nothing criminal. Nothing alarming until the last page. A scanned image from a 2010 invoice. Alessa Warren's signature. It matched the letter perfectly. They didn't want to scare her. That was the first rule. So Khloe offered to go alone. She insisted. Guess if I show up with a retired detective, she'll shut down. But if I go as Jenna's sister, maybe she talks. Corbin reluctantly agreed. He gave her one of his old voice recorders, just in case she opens up. But be careful. You don't know what she's holding. I'm not scared, Khloe said. And she meant it. Morro Bay was misty that morning. The kind of fog that clings to your skin and dulls the edges of the world. Khloe drove to the address listed on the background check, a modest bungalow tucked behind a line of eucalyptus trees. Wind chimes clinked gently on the porch. A black cat watched her from the railing. Khloe knocked. The door opened a few inches. A woman in her mid-30s peeked out. Short cropped hair. Wary eyes. Thin, yes. Khloe smiled softly. My name is Khloe. I'm Jenna Dinger's sister. The woman froze. Then, without a word, She stepped aside and let her in. The living room smelled like lavender and dust. Alessa didn't offer coffee. She didn't ask how Khloe had found her. She simply sat down in a wicker chair and stared at her own hands. "I thought about coming to the trial," she said eventually, "but I knew I wouldn't make it through the door." Khloe sat across from her. "I got your letter." Ali nodded once. "He didn't plan to kill them," she said, not at first. "I know that sounds insane, but he wasn't that kind of guy. It's not then." Khloe didn't interrupt. Ali continued, her voice soft but steady. "He was desperate. He was obsessed with those mineral sites. He thought he'd found something big, like a hidden vein of thorite or maybe xenotimes, something that could be worth millions. And Marcus found out. Saw the maps. Saw what he was doing on federal land. And threatened to report him." She paused. "I don't think Leland believed it would go that far. He thought Marcus would fold. But when they met that day, Marcus didn't fold." "And Jenna?" Khloe asked. Allie's mouth twitched. "She was never supposed to be there. That's what he told me. After that, she just showed up, that she saw everything." Khloe's hands gripped the arms of the chair. "Why didn't you come forward?" "I was scared," Allie whispered. "He said, if I told anyone, I'd go down too." "I helped him draft some of the maps. I helped him load the survey data into the GPS files. I didn't know what it was for, not at first. But when the story broke, when the couple went missing, I knew." She looked up, but I swear to God I didn't know he'd killed them until after. "I found him burning some of the backup maps in a fire pit behind his house. That's when he told me." And he was calm, like it had already left him. Khloe asked the next question quietly. "Do you know if anyone else helped him?" Allie shook her head. "No. Just me. I wish I could undo it, but I can't." She reached into a drawer beside her and pulled out a sealed envelope. "There's a USB inside," she said. "Old survey data. Emails. Stuff I saved. I always told myself, if someone came asking, I'd give it to them." Khloe took it. She stood to leave. "Thank you," she said. Allie didn't reply, but as Khloe stepped out into the gray light of the coast, she felt the weight shift just slightly. One more piece of the truth had surfaced. The story wasn't over. Not quite yet. Detective Corbin never liked hope. Not the kind people held on to in unsolved cases. The brittle, unrealistic kind that bent the truth and made them see ghosts in surveillance footage or hear voices in the wind. Hope to him was a landmine. It waited quietly, then blew everything apart when reality stepped in. But as he stared at the USB drive Khloe had delivered, evidence saved for over a decade by a woman who should have been a suspect, Corbin felt something he didn't quite recognize. Not hope. Something quieter, like the steady hum of a case that refused to be buried. The drive contained over 6 gigabytes of data. Corbin sat in the sheriff's department's new cold case office, a space they'd offered him even post-retirement, and sifted through the files. Most were innocuous survey logs, terrain scans, geological overlays, and obscure software formats. But tucked between folders labeled topo_2010 and rareearth_calc, he found a series of emails archived as .eml files. The messages spanned from November 2010, June 2, 2011, just 2 days before Marcus and Jenna disappeared. They were between Leland Croft and a Warren. They showed a steady shift from academic obsession to criminal intent. March 12, 2011, Ollie. The new readings at Sector 5 matched the thorite concentration we saw back in January. This could be it. Start organizing the maps for Sector 6 and delete anything tagged near JTNP from the export files. Let's be smart. May 17, 2011, Marcus knows. He accessed the drive, saw the overlays. He confronted me in the office today. I told him it was a mineral hobby project. He didn't buy it. Told me he might go to the BLM. If he does, everything folds. June 1st, 2011, he texted me. Wants to meet in person? I told him, fine, that we'd settle it like adults. He doesn't understand how big this is. If he talks, we both burn. But I'm not letting him blow this up. I've spent too long. Just be ready, in case it gets ugly. The messages were incriminating. But the final email chilled Corbin to the core. June 2nd, 2011. He's bringing her. I thought it'd just be Marcus, but Jenna's coming too, camping in the area, probably to throw me off. This wasn't the plan. But I'll handle it, one way or another. That was it. No more messages, no drafts, no follow-ups. It was clear Croft had made the decision to silence them both before they ever arrived, and Alessa Warren had known. Corbin took the drive straight to the district attorney. The prosecutor, lean, blunt, politically ambitious, listened to his summary, then leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "We've already got Croft convicted," he said. "What does this change?" "It makes obstruction official," Corbin said. "It adds another accessory to the case. She may not have participated in the murders, but she helped him hide it. She knew for 11 years and said nothing. And now we've got digital proof." The DA nodded slowly. "You want to arrest her?" "No," Corbin said. "I want immunity. I want her to testify." The prosecutor's eyebrow arched. "She doesn't get to walk away scot-free." "She already did," Corbin said. 11 years. What we need now is for the public to hear the full story. No more holes. No more speculation. Just the truth. The DA exhaled. "We'll draft an agreement. Conditional immunity. She testifies on record, full account, and if anything in her testimony contradicts the evidence, the deal's void." Corbin nodded. Fair. Khloe sat across from Allie Warren in the same living room where they'd met weeks before. TV was on mute in the background. Nature footage of mountain lions in Arizona. The black cat curled on the windowsill hadn't moved. "They want your statement," Khloe said gently. "Under oath." On record. Allie looked tired. Older, somehow. "Figured," she said. "They're offering you a deal," Khloe said. "You tell the whole story? No more half-truths. You testify to everything you knew when you knew it and why you didn't come forward. You get immunity." Khloe was silent. Finally, she asked, "Will it make a difference?" Khloe didn't answer. "Right away? Then it already has." Allie's deposition was recorded in early September at a neutral office in Riverside, under oath, with representatives from the DA's office. Corbin and Khloe present. The transcript filled 63 pages. The recording lasted just under 3 hours. She laid it all out. How she had met Leland during a summer internship, how he had charmed her, offered mentorship, a sense of purpose, a role in something big. How the surveys began innocently enough, how Leland's behavior changed once he discovered the first thorite indicators in late 2009, how he started talking in terms of finders' rights, about just taking a little about what they don't know won't hurt them. She admitted to helping him create the map. Overlays, she admitted she knew it was illegal. She admitted she suspected. Marcus might confront him, but said she never imagined it would end in death. And then her voice broke. "I could have warned them," she said through tears. "I could have done something." Khloe sat beside her, silent. The truth was a heavy thing, and Allie had carried it a long time. The DA's office didn't file charges. Allie Warren was released from legal obligations, provided she testified again if any appeals were filed. Testimony became the final appendix to the case file. And just like that, the last shadow faded. There were no more theories, no more missing pieces. Everything was known. 2 weeks later, Corbin boxed up his personal notes on the case. He gave the district copies, mailed another set to Khloe, and destroyed the rest. He returned to fishing, to walks with his dog, to the kind of retirement he'd promised himself decades ago. But now, when people asked him about the Dinger case, he told them the truth. "The worst thing I ever worked," he'd say, "and the one I'm most proud of." Khloe, meanwhile, did something she hadn't done in years. She wrote, not in her blog that had gone quiet after the trial, not in letters to the editor or advocacy groups, not even in social media posts tagged with her sister's name. She started writing a book, a quiet, haunting narrative, part memoir, part investigation, about the way people disappear and how we try to make sense of it, about desserts and silence and sisters and grief. She called it the quiet between stars. It wasn't about Croft, it wasn't about maps or courtrooms or torture. It was about Jenna and Marcus and the future they were supposed to have. In the final chapter, she wrote, "Some people think the desert buries everything, but I don't believe that anymore. It doesn't bury. It remembers. It hides. Just long enough for someone to return with a better question, and when they do, it answers. Jenna, I never stopped asking. The desert never stopped listening." The following spring, The Quiet Between Stars was published. It arrived without fanfare, a modest print run through a regional imprint based out of Santa Fe, with a cover photograph taken by Khloe herself, a wide sun-bleached desert horizon, a single Joshua tree in the foreground. Its shadow long and solitary. She hadn't expected it to go anywhere. She didn't write it for acclaim, but the book caught on. Not as a true crime expose or a documentary-style procedural. It was subtler than that. Reviewers called it quietly devastating, a portrait of grief with the restraint of poetry. It wasn't about the killer. It was about the whole left behind. About the idea of silence as both wound and witness. It made its way onto grief support forums, college syllabi, desert ecology podcasts. NPR featured a small segment on Khloe, calling her story a soft-spoken reckoning with the long tail of violence. She was invited to speak at libraries, at women's centers, at writing retreats, and eventually at law enforcement conferences. It was at one of those at Criminal Justice Symposium in San Diego. She met Sergeant Devin Rhodes. Rhodes had read the book, cover to cover. He told her so when they crossed paths after her panel. He wore the uniform of a man who lived half in the field, half behind a desk, boots that had seen real dirt, a posture shaped by hours behind a screen. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, with gray beginning to show at the temples, and eyes that didn't blink too much when difficult things were said aloud. "I think the worst part of that story," said, "is how long it went unanswered." Khloe nodded. "That was the part I couldn't forgive." Rhodes had worked cold cases in Barstow. He was familiar with the terrain, the culture of overlooked leads, the slow bureaucratic leak of interest when the story stops being new. They talked for 40 minutes over coffee in the back of the conference center. When she returned home, there was an email waiting from him. "If you ever want to collaborate on something more formal, training, advocacy outreach, I think people would listen." That was how it began. Not with mourning, with rebuilding. In the months that followed, Khloe and Rhodes co-authored a short training module titled Victim Persistence, the Role of Family in Cold Case Advocacy. It was based on Khloe's firsthand experience, combined with Rhodes' internal knowledge of procedural breakdowns. It was taught to new recruits in 2 sheriff's departments and made available online through a public safety grant. It was a start. Khloe felt herself waking up, not just from grief, but from paralysis, because the truth was, the case had broken. Something in her, something foundational. It had made her see how easily people could vanish, how evidence could be dismissed, intuition minimized, witnesses forgotten. She couldn't undo that awareness, but she could shape what came next, and what came next was watching in. July of 2024, a call came in from a park ranger, stationed in the northeast edge of Joshua Tree. A hiker had gone missing near the rugged Pinto Basin region. A 23-year-old anthropology student from UC Riverside, female solo backpacking trip. 2 days overdue, the ranger reached out to Rhodes, who forwarded the case to Khloe not because she was law enforcement, but because he had learned to trust her instincts about the desert. Khloe spent hours reviewing the terrain maps, comparing them to her own past hikes, the old Dinger case overlays, weather patterns. She caught a detail no one else had. A sudden flash flood that had rerouted a popular canyon washed 2.4 miles from the expected trailhead. Search and rescue found the student there, sunburnt and dehydrated but alive. When they pulled her out, she kept repeating one sentence. "I saw the tree with the ribbon. That's how I knew to wait." No one understood what she meant until Khloe, reviewing satellite footage from 4 years earlier, recognized the spot. It was the same area Jenna had once photographed on her final trip. The tree with the ribbon had been tied by Khloe back when the search was still new and desperate. She had left hundreds across the landscape, marking places they'd searched, places she hoped Jenna might have passed. Most had long since decayed or blown away, but one had remained, and it had saved someone. Khloe didn't tell anyone at first, not Rhodes, not her parents, not even Corbin. She simply sat on her porch that evening, a cold drink in one hand, the dog asleep at her feet, and let the strange, bittersweet symmetry of it all wash over her. Jenna's ghost had saved a girl. A memory had become a beacon for the first time in years. Khloe allowed herself to believe in something she'd once given up on entirely, meaning not in the horror, but in what followed that fall. Khloe returned to the spot where Jenna and the baby had been buried. The desert was cooler now, the sky deepening early with the season. She brought two things: a new ribbon, this one blue, clean, looped carefully around the same branch, and a stone, carved by hand, reading simply, "You were found. Here, you will guide others." She placed it beneath the tree, then stood in silence, hand resting against its bark. Feeling the faint breath of wind curl around her arm, it didn't feel like goodbye. It felt like a beginning. A year passed. The desert didn't change much, but Khloe did. She no longer woke with the pressure of unanswered questions pressing down on her chest. She had learned how to sleep again, not because she had forgotten, but because she had finally placed the story where it belonged. It was part of her, not all of her. The book continued to find quiet success. An editor reached out to discuss a second printing. University professor in Arizona adapted parts of it into a curriculum on justice, memory, and landscape. Another podcast did a deep dive into the Croft trial and used excerpts from Khloe's original interviews. But what reached her the most? What she kept printed in a small folder next to her bed were the letters, emails, handwritten notes, messages from strangers, from women who had lost sisters, husbands, children, from retired officers who admitted their own blind spots, from desert hikers who had once stood in the same canyons, walked the same ridges, unaware of the story beneath. Their boots. One message read, "I was 16 when they disappeared. I remember thinking that could have been my sister. Now I'm 30, and I still think that. Thank you for not letting her be forgotten." Khloe didn't always respond, but she read every word. Then, late September 2024, a new call came in. Not from Joshua Tree, from somewhere far older, a retired geologist named Vincent. Mercado had been sifting through digitized archives of U.S. Geological Survey data for a memoir project, a vanity publication. Mostly stories about old mining towns and forgotten quarries. While reviewing survey maps from the early 2000s, he came across a name he hadn't seen in years, Leland Croft. Croft had annotated several layers of private maps that Mercado had briefly reviewed in 2010 during a conference in Reno. Back then, Croft had claimed he was compiling a database of thorium sites, rare earth elements. Mercado hadn't taken him seriously, but now, in hindsight, he recognized something strange. One of the maps listed not just thorite concentrations, but prospect targets tagged alt burial, ROP. Site 2, an airflow void vent. He didn't understand what those meant, but they didn't sound geological. He turned the files over to a friend in the Nevada BLM, and from there, the documents made their way eventually to Rhodes, who forwarded them to Khloe with a short subject line, "You should see this." Khloe stared at the documents on her screen. Old PDFs, map layers, geological notes, mixed with cryptic symbols they didn't reference Marcus or Jenna, but they were in the same style Croft had used in the files Allie Warren had kept, and two of the notations were dated after June 2011. That raised an immediate question. What? Why? Would Croft keep mapping burial targets 2 years after the dingers were gone? What was he still hiding? Khloe called Corbin that night. He listened quietly as she read through the annotations, then asked her to forward everything. "I'll run it by a contact of mine at the U.S. Forest Service," he said. "Could be nothing. But you're right. If those marks are what they look like, there might be more to this." "More?" she asked. Croft had over 20 documented sites. We only ever found 2 connected to the dingers. What if? He trailed off. What if this wasn't the first time? The next month was a whirlwind. An interagency task group was quietly formed between the BLM, the FBI's Environmental Crimes Unit, and the National Parks Service. They reviewed every known Croft survey, every GIS tag, every registered flight log, every campsite near his old prospecting locations, and then, in November 2024, they found something. A sinkhole. Partially collapsed off a trail in the Mojave National Preserve. Inside, human remains. 2 adults. Early estimates put the time of death between 2005 and 2007. They had never been reported missing. There was no ID, but in the pocket of a tattered hiking vest. They found a metal medallion, the kind handed out at an amateur mining expo in Tucson. 2006, it bore a name, L. Croft guest speaker. News broke like wildfire. Croft may be linked to additional deaths. Desert sinkhole yields new remains. Was there a pattern? A serial disposer? The headline speculated. Experts weighed in. Podcast hosts rushed out emergency episodes. TikTok sleuths posted theories by the minute. But for Khloe, it wasn't noise. It was horror. Because if this was true, if Croft had killed before then, Marcus and Jenna weren't an anomaly. They were part of a pattern, and no one had seen it. She sat in her car that night, just outside the gallery where she now worked twice a week, and stared at the glowing, a screen of her phone. The news scrolled endlessly, but she wasn't reading anymore, she was seeing. Jenna again, not the smiling photo, not the ultrasound picture or the trailhead image. She was seeing her in that final moment. Maybe realizing what was about to happen, maybe standing beside Marcus, maybe trying to protect the baby inside her. And Khloe thought, what if I was? Never just following a murder. What if I was tracing the edge of something much bigger? The winter rains arrived in January 2025, rare, cold, and relentless. Joshua Tree, it's always brittle and sun-bleached, turned slick and strange. Trails vanished under flash flood debris. Riverbeds that hadn't seen water in years hissed and surged. For the first time in months, tourists stayed away. The desert felt quiet again, the kind of quiet Khloe remembered from the search days. Not peaceful, expectant by now. The truth about Leland Croft had become unavoidable. Forensics confirmed the Mojave sinkhole remains belonged to 2 missing amateur mineral surveyors, Travis Hewer and Denise McCall. Last seen in 2006, after attending a mining expo in Arizona. They had crossed paths with Croft once, according to a paper trail of permit filings and survey overlaps. Croft's method, investigators realized, had been cloaked not in mystery but in bureaucratic camouflage. He'd used wilderness permits, temporary BLM site claims, and arcane mineral rights loopholes to disappear people into land. The government barely mapped. For years, the theory had been that Jenna and Marcus were victims of impulse, or rage, or greed. But now, it looked like they were victims of routine. Khloe found herself walking through those thoughts. Every morning, she kept returning to one unbearable detail. Jenna had never stood a chance. Not because she wasn't brave or clever. She was both, but because Croft had already rehearsed the crime. He'd practiced burying secrets long before her. Khloe had spent more than a decade chasing her sister's shadow through the sand, and now that shadow was stretching over people she'd never met. That spring, she gave her second testimony. This time to a federal grand jury. She brought documents, timelines, witness statements, GIS overlays, everything she and Corbin had collected. Everything Ollie had preserved. The jury reviewed the case for 6 days. Then came the indictment. Croft was officially charged with 2 additional counts of murder and a federal environmental violation for the unlawful disposal of human remains on protected land. It was the first case of its kind, eh? Murderer facing charges for polluting the very ecosystem he used to conceal his crimes. Some called it symbolic. Khloe thought it was long overdue. That summer she drove the long, slow road back to the exact place Jenna and Marcus had last camped. Not the gravesite, not the marked memorial or the public pull-off. The real campsite, the one the rescue teams had first. Flagged in June 2011, the one where a panicked ranger had found a half-packed bag, an open box of prenatal vitamins, and a sun-faded printout of a topographical map with Jenna's handwritten note. Short hike, AM back before noon. Khloe stood in the wind in silence. The desert had swallowed the evidence. No tarp, no tent poles, just the imprint of their absence. She unrolled a small canvas and painted. Not in broad strokes, not symbols or colors or gestures. She painted the scene exactly as it was, the ridge, the juniper skeleton, the scattered rocks, and in one corner, barely visible, a white ribbon caught in a thorn bush. The past, still clinging to the present. She left the canvas pinned under a stone, not as art, as testimony. Months passed. Croft filed an appeal. It was denied. His health began to fail in prison. Pancreatic cancer, the reporters said. Stage 4. He died in hospice care in late September 2025, under guard. In a windowless room with no family present, he never confessed to anything beyond the Dinger murders. Never named other victims. Never. Gave reasons. When Khloe read the news, she didn't feel satisfaction, only silence. A very old silence. But this time, didn't feel like defeat. It felt like punctuation. The story was over, finally. A few days later, she received a letter. It was postmarked Silver City, New Mexico, no return name. Handwritten envelope. Inside, a photograph, a dusty mesa, a hollowed-out stone cabin, distant tree, and a sticky note. There may be others. No signature, no explanation, just possibility. Khloe didn't hesitate. She forwarded the photo to Rhodes then. She packed a small bag, arranged care for her dog, booked a one-way train ticket through El Paso. She wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. She was following a pattern she now understood. Because for people like Croft, disappearance wasn't a single act, it was a system. And the only way to dismantle a system was to keep walking into the places no one else wanted to look. In the final lines of her next book, one she hadn't even begun when she boarded that train, Khloe would write, "We go to the desert thinking it's empty, but it is full. What we lost, of what we buried, of what waits to be unearthed. Somewhere out there, someone is still missing. But I am not."